Marcus Chen had spent 15 years perfecting his martial arts skills. The 28-year-old instructor ran a small dojo in downtown Seattle, teaching teenagers and working professionals the discipline of Taekwondo. His black belt wasn't just a piece of fabric around his waist. It represented countless hours of training, broken bones that had healed stronger, and a philosophy of respect that governed every aspect of his life. That Tuesday morning started like any other. Marcus arrived at his dojo at 6 a.m, sweeping the floors and preparing for his first class. The familiar scent of rubber mats and the echo of his footsteps in the empty training hall brought him peace. He had no idea that in 12 hours, his entire world would change forever. The invitation arrived by courier at precisely noon. Marcus was between classes, reviewing technique videos on his laptop, when a man in an expensive suit knocked on his door. The envelope bore an official seal that Marcus didn't recognize. Intricate gold lettering on heavy cream paper that felt important between his fingers. Inside, the message was brief but stunning. The Royal Embassy of Valdoria requested his presence at an exclusive martial arts demonstration that evening. Marcus had never heard of Valdoria, but a quick internet search revealed it was a small European nation, known for its ancient traditions and modern wealth. The invitation mentioned a substantial honorarium for participating, enough to cover his dojo's rent for 3 months. Marcus called his girlfriend Sarah immediately. She worked as a researcher at the university library and had a knack for finding information about obscure topics. Within an hour, she had gathered everything available about Valdoria's royal family and their traditions. They take their ceremonial guards very seriously, Sarah explained over the phone. These aren't just soldiers in fancy uniforms. They're trained from childhood in traditional combat methods. The current prince, Alessandro, is apparently obsessed with proving that modern martial arts are inferior to classical European fighting techniques. Marcus felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. The demonstration would be held at the Valdorian Embassy, which occupied an entire city block in an upscale neighborhood. He had competed in tournaments before, but never in such a formal setting. The invitation specified that he should wear his traditional dobok and bring his belt credentials. That evening, Marcus stood before his mirror, adjusting his pristine white uniform. The black belt tied around his waist represented not just his skill, but his commitment to the principles his master had taught him. Respect, humility, and using strength only when necessary. He grabbed his gear bag and drove toward what he assumed would be a cultural exchange between different fighting traditions. The Valdorian embassy was magnificent. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over marble floors, and tapestries depicting medieval battles hung from the walls. Marcus was greeted by embassy staff who spoke in hushed, reverent tones about the evening's proceedings. Other martial artists had also been invited, a karate master from Japan, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion, and several practitioners of various fighting styles. They were led to a grand ballroom that had been converted into a makeshift arena. Padded mats covered the floor, and ornate chairs surrounded the perimeter for distinguished guests. Embassy officials, local dignitaries, and what appeared to be foreign diplomats filled the seats. At the head of the room sat Prince Alessandro, a man in his 30s with sharp features and an expression of barely concealed disdain. The prince stood to address the assembled fighters. His English carried a thick accent, but his words were clear and pointed. Tonight, we honor the fighting traditions that built nations and forged character in men. You represent modern interpretations of combat, techniques divorced from the nobility and honor that once defined warriors. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. The prince's tone suggested this wasn't a friendly cultural exchange, but rather a challenge to everything Marcus believed about martial arts. The other invited fighters shifted uncomfortably, sensing the same underlying tension. My royal guards have trained since childhood in the ancient ways, the prince continued. They understand that fighting is not just about physical technique, but about representing something greater than oneself. Tonight, we will see if modern methods can match traditional excellence. A side door opened, and 6 guards entered the ballroom. They wore ceremonial uniforms, deep blue tunics with gold braiding, white gloves, and tall boots that clicked against the marble floor. Each guard carried himself with military precision. But Marcus noticed something else. These men moved like fighters. Their shoulders held the subtle tension of people ready to spring into action at any moment. The demonstration began with formal presentations. Each visiting martial artist performed a kata or demonstration of their style, while the guards watched with neutral expressions. When Marcus's turn came, he performed a complex taekwondo form, his kicks precise and powerful, his movements flowing like water between strikes. The guards then demonstrated their own techniques, a hybrid of classical fencing, boxing, and wrestling that emphasized control and dominance over flashy technique. Their movements were efficient and brutal, designed for real combat rather than sport competition. Prince Alessandro's voice cut through the applause. Now we will see how these different philosophies perform under pressure. I propose friendly sparring matches between my guards and our honored guests. Light contact only, of course, to demonstrate technique rather than cause injury. The other martial artists exchanged glances. This wasn't what they had been told to expect, but declining would be diplomatically awkward. One by one, they accepted matches against the royal guards. Marcus watched as the karate master faced off against a guard who seemed to anticipate every technique before it was thrown. The Brazilian jiu-jitsu champion found his grappling attempts countered by strikes that, while technically light contact, carried enough force to discourage continued attempts. Each visiting martial artist performed respectably, but the guards clearly dominated through superior conditioning and aggressive tactics that pushed the boundaries of friendly demonstration. When Marcus's turn came, he faced Captain Viktor Kozlov, the head of the Royal Guard. Kozlov was built like a heavyweight boxer but moved with the fluid grace of a dancer. His eyes held the flat, measuring gaze of someone who had seen real violence and emerged unchanged by it. They bowed to each other according to martial arts tradition, though Kozlov's bow was perfunctory at best. The match began slowly, both fighters testing distance and timing. Marcus threw a few probing kicks, which Kozlov evaded with minimal effort. The captain responded with sharp punches that Marcus slipped, his taekwondo footwork keeping him just out of range. The pace increased gradually. Marcus began to incorporate more complex combinations, his kicks whistling through the air where Kozlov's head had been moments before. The captain's counters grew more aggressive, his punches carrying enough power that Marcus felt the wind from near misses. Something shifted in the dynamic. Kozlov began targeting Marcus's supporting leg with low kicks that, while technically legal, carried obvious intent to cause damage. Marcus adjusted his stance and distance, but the captain pressed forward, using his weight and reach advantage to crowd the younger fighter. The watching crowd grew quiet as the intensity escalated beyond friendly demonstration. Marcus realized that Kozlov wasn't interested in showcasing technique. He was trying to prove a point about the superiority of traditional European fighting methods. Each exchange grew more heated, pride and philosophy clashing as much as bodies. Marcus attempted a high kick that Kozlov caught and used to off-balance him. As Marcus recovered, the captain threw a straight right hand that grazed his temple, hard enough to make his ears ring. The strike was clearly harder than the agreed-upon light contact, but the referee, an embassy official rather than a neutral party, said nothing. Anger began to replace Marcus's initial nervousness. This wasn't a cultural demonstration anymore. It was a deliberate attempt to humiliate him and everything his training represented. He could see the smug satisfaction on Prince Alessandro's face as his captain dominated another visiting martial artist. Kozlov pressed his advantage, throwing combinations that forced Marcus to backpedal toward the edge of the mat. The captain's techniques were crude, but effective, using his size and aggression to overwhelm Marcus's more refined skills. A particularly hard body shot doubled Marcus over, causing him to gasp for air, while the audience murmured their approval. Marcus straightened slowly, his mind racing. Every principle his master had taught him said to control his emotions, to respond to aggression with technique rather than anger. But those principles had been developed for sporting contexts, not for situations where he was being deliberately provoked and physically dominated in front of an audience eager to see him fail. The captain moved in for what appeared to be a finishing combination, his confidence evident in his relaxed guard and aggressive forward movement. Marcus saw his opportunity in that moment of overconfidence. Years of training had ingrained certain responses so deeply that they bypassed conscious thought entirely. As Kozlov committed to a looping right hand, Marcus stepped inside the arc of the punch and launched himself upward. His right foot connected with devastating precision just below the captain's ribcage, lifting the larger man completely off the ground. The kick carried every ounce of Marcus's frustration, skill, and 15 years of dedicated training. Captain Kozlov crashed backward into the wall behind him, his breath leaving his lungs in a sharp wheeze. He slumped to the floor, conscious but clearly hurt, one hand pressed against his side where Marcus's foot had landed. The ballroom fell completely silent except for the sound of the captain's labored breathing. Marcus stood in the center of the mat, his chest rising and falling rapidly, staring at what he had done. The satisfaction of landing such a perfect technique warred with the growing realization that he had just kicked a royal guard in front of a room full of diplomats and dignitaries. Prince Alessandro's face had gone from smug satisfaction to cold fury. Embassy officials whispered urgently among themselves while the other guards moved to help their captain to his feet. Marcus remained frozen in place, understanding that this moment would change his life in ways he couldn't yet comprehend. The silence stretched on, heavy with implications and unspoken consequences, as everyone in the room tried to process what had just happened and what it might mean for the future. The silence that followed Captain Kozlov's collision with the wall seemed to last forever, though it probably only endured for 30 seconds. Marcus watched as embassy officials rushed to help the captain to his feet, their urgent whispers creating a buzz of anxiety throughout the ballroom. Kozlov was conscious but clearly shaken, one hand still pressed against his ribs where Marcus's kick had landed. Prince Alessandro rose from his chair slowly, his movements deliberate and controlled. The fury in his eyes was unmistakable, but his voice remained steady when he finally spoke. "Ladies and gentlemen, I believe tonight's demonstrations have concluded." His gaze never left Marcus as he continued. "Mr. Chen, please remain. We have matters to discuss." The other martial artists were escorted out quickly by embassy staff, their expressions mixing sympathy with relief that they weren't the ones facing the prince's wrath. The distinguished guests filed out in hushed conversations, stealing glances back at Marcus as they departed. Within minutes, only Marcus, the prince, the royal guards, and a few senior embassy officials remained in the ballroom. Marcus stood alone in the center of the mat, his traditional white dobok now feeling more like a target than a symbol of honor. His hands trembled slightly as the adrenaline from the fight began to wear off, replaced by a growing sense of dread about what would happen next. Prince Alessandro approached slowly, his leather shoes clicking against the marble floor around the matted area. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of centuries of royal authority. "Do you understand what you have done, Mr. Chen?" Marcus found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "Your captain was using excessive force. I defended myself, according to my training." "Defended yourself?" The prince's laugh was cold and humorless. "You assaulted a member of my personal guard in my own embassy. In my country, such an act would be considered an attack on the crown itself." The embassy official who had served as the referee stepped forward nervously. "Your Highness, perhaps we should consider that this was technically within the context of a sparring match. No formal charges need to be filed." Alessandro's sharp glance silenced the man immediately. "Captain Kozlov, are you able to stand?" The captain pushed away the hands trying to help him and straightened with visible effort. His face was pale but his voice was steady. "I am fine, Your Highness. The American caught me off guard with an illegal technique." "Illegal?" Marcus felt his anger returning. "That was a basic taekwondo kick. There was nothing illegal about it. In civilized combat, one does not attack with such brutality." Kozlov replied, finally able to stand without support. "Your technique shows a lack of control and discipline." Marcus bit back his immediate response. He knew that losing his temper further would only make his situation worse. But the hypocrisy of being lectured about control by a man who had been deliberately trying to hurt him was almost unbearable. Prince Alessandro raised his hand for silence. "Mr. Chen, you have placed me in a very difficult position. I invited you here as a gesture of cultural goodwill, and you have responded by injuring my personal guard. This cannot simply be overlooked." The prince began pacing in a small circle around Marcus, his words measured and deliberate. However, I am not without understanding of the warrior's spirit. Your technique, while brutally applied, was admittedly skillful. Perhaps we can find a resolution that serves justice while acknowledging your passion for your art." Marcus didn't like the tone of the prince's voice or the calculating look in his eyes. "What kind of resolution? Tomorrow evening, we will hold a proper match. You, against Captain Kozlov, under formal rules with appropriate oversight. If you win, this incident will be forgotten, and you will leave with both compensation for your time and my respect. If you lose—" The prince's smile was not pleasant. "Trust. Well, let us say that the legal consequences for assaulting a royal guard can be quite severe, even on foreign soil." The embassy official who had spoken earlier shifted uncomfortably. "Your Highness, I'm not certain that diplomatic immunity extends to arranging what amounts to a sanctioned fight on embassy grounds." Alessandro's gaze could have cut glass. "Are you questioning my authority in my own embassy, Mr. Patterson?" "Of course not, Your Highness. I simply want to ensure that all proper protocols are followed." Marcus realized he was being maneuvered into a corner with no good options. Refusing the prince's challenge would likely result in serious legal troubles, but accepting meant facing Kozlov again under rules that would undoubtedly favor the captain. "What kind of formal rules?" Marcus asked. Captain Kozlov stepped forward, his breathing now steady, though Marcus could see him favoring his left side slightly. "Traditional European judicial combat. First blood, submission, or unconsciousness determines the victor. No time limits, minimal protective equipment." Marcus's martial arts training had exposed him to various fighting formats, but judicial combat was essentially a barely controlled fight. The rules favored aggression and durability over technical skill, exactly the opposite of what would give him an advantage against the larger, stronger captain. "That's not a martial arts match," Marcus protested. "That's a street fight with a fancy name. It is the traditional method by which men of honor settle disputes that cannot be resolved through words," Prince Alessandro replied. "Unless, of course, your modern martial arts have made you too civilized for such things." The challenge in the prince's voice was unmistakable. Marcus understood that this was about more than just the incident with Captain Kozlov. The prince was using this situation to prove his point about traditional European fighting methods being superior to modern martial arts. Marcus had become an unwitting symbol in a cultural war he didn't even know was being fought. "I need time to consider this," Marcus said finally. "Of course. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. If you decline, I will be forced to pursue other remedies for tonight's incident." The prince's meaning was clear, without being explicitly stated. Marcus was escorted out of the embassy by 2 guards, who remained politely professional despite what had happened to their captain. The cool night air hit him like a physical shock after the intensity of the ballroom confrontation. His hands were shaking again, though whether from adrenaline, anger, or fear, he couldn't tell. He drove home in a daze, his mind racing through everything that had happened. The elegant trap he had walked into was becoming clearer with each passing minute. The prince had orchestrated the entire evening to provoke exactly this kind of incident, giving him the excuse to arrange a more formal confrontation that would serve his agenda. Sarah was waiting for him when he arrived at his apartment, her face full of concern. She had been researching Valdorian customs and legal systems since their earlier phone call, and what she had found wasn't encouraging. "How bad is it?" she asked as soon as he walked through the door. Marcus collapsed onto his couch and told her everything that had happened. From the escalating intensity of the sparring match to the prince's ultimatum, Sarah listened without interruption, her expression growing more worried with each detail. When he finished, she was quiet for a long moment before speaking. "I found some things about Valdorian diplomatic practices that you're not going to like. They have a history of using their embassy status to arrange what they call honor disputes that are basically sanctioned fights. The local authorities tend to look the other way because it's technically happening on sovereign Valdorian soil. So I'm really trapped in this? It looks that way. The prince has diplomatic immunity, and the embassy grounds are considered Valdorian territory. If you refuse his challenge and he decides to press charges, it becomes an international incident that will probably end badly for you." Marcus ran his hands through his hair, trying to think of alternatives. Every option seemed to lead to the same conclusion. He would have to fight Captain Kozlov again, this time under rules designed to give every advantage to the larger, more aggressive fighter. "There's something else," Sarah continued reluctantly. "I found some information about Prince Alessandro's background. He's apparently obsessed with proving that traditional European fighting methods are superior to modern martial arts. He's arranged similar challenges in other countries, always with the same format." "What happened in those other fights?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the evening air coming through his apartment windows. They spent the next several hours researching everything they could find about judicial combat rules, Captain Kozlov's background, and any possible legal alternatives to the prince's challenge. The more they learned, the clearer it became that Marcus was facing a situation designed to be unwinnable. Kozlov had been the prince's personal guard for over 10 years. Before that, he had served in special forces units and competed in underground fighting circuits throughout Eastern Europe. His fighting style was a brutal combination of military combatives and traditional boxing that emphasized overwhelming opponents through superior conditioning and pain tolerance. The judicial combat format eliminated most of the technical advantages that might have given Marcus a chance. No rounds meant no rest periods. Minimal protective equipment meant that Kozlov's size and strength advantages would be magnified. The first blood rule meant that one lucky punch could end the fight instantly. As dawn approached, Marcus made his decision. He couldn't live with the legal consequences of refusing the challenge, and his pride wouldn't allow him to back down from a fight he had essentially started. But he also couldn't enter the match using the same approach that had gotten him into trouble in the first place. If he was going to face Captain Kozlov again, he would need to fight smarter, not harder. The prince expected him to rely on the flashy techniques that had impressed audiences but ultimately failed against Kozlov's aggressive pressure. Marcus would have to dig deeper into his training, finding the principles that transcended any particular style or rule set. His master had always taught that true martial arts wasn't about techniques or styles, but about understanding distance, timing, and human nature. Tomorrow night, Marcus would find out if 15 years of training had taught him enough about all three to survive what was essentially a legalized assault. The sun was rising over Seattle as Marcus finally tried to get some sleep, knowing that the next evening would either vindicate everything he believed about martial arts or destroy him completely. Either way, he would face it as a martial artist should, with courage, skill, and an unshakable commitment to proving that technique and discipline could overcome brute force and political manipulation. But as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he was walking into something far more dangerous than a simple fight. The prince's confident smile and Captain Kozlov's cold eyes suggested that they knew something he didn't, something that would make tomorrow night's match even more difficult than he could imagine. Marcus arrived at the embassy the following evening, with a clarity of purpose he hadn't possessed the night before. The sleepless hours between dawn and dusk had been spent not just in physical preparation, but in mental reconstruction of everything he thought he knew about fighting and about himself. Sarah had wanted to come with him, but Marcus knew this was something he had to face alone. The last thing he told her before leaving his apartment was that regardless of what happened, he wouldn't compromise the principles his master had taught him. Win or lose, he would fight as a martial artist, not as a brawler. The embassy staff who greeted him seemed nervous, their usual professional composure cracked by the unusual nature of the evening's proceedings. Marcus was led not to the ballroom where the previous night's demonstration had taken place, but to a smaller, more private room that had been converted into a makeshift arena. The space was stark and functional. Thin mats covered a concrete floor, and portable lighting cast harsh shadows across the walls. There were only a dozen chairs arranged around the perimeter, occupied by embassy officials and what appeared to be Prince Alessandro's personal staff. No diplomats or cultural observers were present. This was no longer a demonstration, but a private settling of accounts. Captain Kozlov was already present, warming up in one corner of the room. He wore simple black shorts and a tank top that revealed the full extent of his muscular build. Tape covered his knuckles and wrists in the style of underground fighters, and Marcus noticed that his movements showed no sign of injury from the previous night's kick. Either the captain was tougher than Marcus had thought, or he was hiding his pain extremely well. Prince Alessandro sat in an ornate chair that had been brought specifically for the occasion. his expression unreadable as he watched Marcus enter. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the diplomatic courtesy of their previous encounters. "Mr. Chen, I trust you have considered the terms we discussed and are prepared to proceed?" Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. The weight of the situation was settling on him like a physical presence, making it hard to breathe normally. "Excellent. The rules are simple. This combat will continue until one participant cannot continue, submits, or draws first blood. There will be no rounds, no rest periods, and no interference from officials unless it becomes apparent that serious permanent injury is imminent." An embassy official who Marcus hadn't seen before stepped forward. He was an older man with the bearing of a retired military officer, and his role as referee was apparently more ceremonial than functional. "Gentlemen, this is judicial combat in the traditional European style. While we are not in Valdoria, we will observe our ancestral customs, fight with honor, show courage, and accept the outcome with dignity." Marcus walked to the center of the mat where Kozlov was already waiting. Up close, the captain looked even more intimidating than he had the night before. His eyes held the flat calm of a professional who had done this many times before, and his stance suggested complete confidence in the outcome. They touched gloves in a perfunctory gesture that satisfied the formal requirements, but carried no warmth or mutual respect. Kozlov's hand was massive compared to Marcus's, and the grip was strong enough to send a message about what would happen if the captain managed to grab him during the fight. The referee stepped back and called for the combat to begin. Kozlov immediately pressed forward, using his size and reach advantage to crowd Marcus toward the edge of the mat. His approach was different from the previous night, more controlled and systematic, but no less aggressive. Clearly, he had spent the intervening hours analyzing what had gone wrong and adjusting his strategy accordingly. Marcus circled away from the captain's advance, using his footwork to maintain distance while studying his opponent's movement patterns. The confined space made his usual evasion tactics more difficult, but it also limited Kozlov's ability to build momentum for his power shots. The first exchange came when Kozlov threw a straight right hand that Marcus slipped, countering with a quick jab to the captain's solar plexus. The punch landed cleanly but seemed to have no effect on the larger man, who responded immediately with a hook that grazed Marcus's temple. The difference in power was immediately apparent. Marcus's best shots seemed to bounce off Kozlov's conditioned torso, while even glancing blows from the captain carried enough force to rattle his teeth. This would have to be a fight won through technique and endurance rather than raw power. Marcus began to implement the strategy he had developed during his sleepless night. Instead of trying to match Kozlov's aggression, he would use the captain's forward pressure against him. Every advance would be met with movement and counters designed to accumulate damage over time, rather than seeking a single decisive blow. The pattern developed quickly. Kozlov would press forward with combinations of punches designed to overwhelm Marcus's defenses. Marcus would give ground while landing precise counters to the captain's exposed ribs and solar plexus. Neither man was taking serious damage, but Marcus was making Kozlov work harder for every exchange. 5 minutes into the fight, both men were breathing heavily, though Marcus could see that his strategy was having an effect. Kozlov's initial confidence was giving way to frustration, as his attempts to end the fight quickly were consistently thwarted by movement and counterpunching. The captain changed tactics, attempting to corner Marcus against the wall, where his size advantage would be maximized. Marcus recognized the danger and used a technique his master had drilled into him countless times. Instead of retreating directly away from pressure, he stepped inside Kozlov's guard and spun away, reversing their positions. Kozlov's surprise at finding himself suddenly backed against the wall cost him precious seconds. Marcus exploited the opportunity with a rapid combination of body shots that finally seemed to have an effect. The captain's breathing became noticeably heavier, and his next advance was measurably slower. But Kozlov's experience in this type of fighting became apparent in how quickly he adapted. Instead of continuing to press for a quick finish, he began to pace himself, using his superior conditioning to turn the fight into a war of attrition. His punches became more selective but carried devastating power when they landed. A straight left hand caught Marcus flush on the cheek, snapping his head back and causing stars to explode across his vision. The follow-up right cross missed by inches, but Marcus could feel the wind from the punch as it passed his face. One clean shot like that would end the fight immediately. Marcus realized that his strategy of gradual accumulation wasn't working fast enough. Kozlov could absorb the punishment he was dealing out, while continuing to pressure for the one decisive blow that would end everything. He needed to take a calculated risk. When Kozlov pressed forward with his next combination, Marcus didn't circle away as he had been doing. Instead, he stepped inside the arc of the captain's punches and launched a devastating knee strike toward Kozlov's midsection. The technique was risky because it required him to enter the captain's preferred fighting range, but the potential payoff was enormous. The knee landed perfectly, driving deep into Kozlov's solar plexus and lifting him slightly off the ground. The captain doubled over, gasping for air. His guard dropped completely for the first time in the fight. Marcus saw his opportunity and took it. A precise uppercut caught Kozlov under the chin, snapping his head back and sending him staggering toward the wall. For a moment, it seemed like the fight might be over, but Kozlov's reputation as the prince's personal guard hadn't been earned through intimidation alone. As Marcus moved in to finish the combination, the captain's training and experience took over. Even hurt and gasping for air, he managed to grab Marcus's advancing arm and use his weight advantage to pull the smaller man into a clinch. Pressed against Kozlov's body, Marcus could feel the captain's strength even as he struggled to breathe normally. Powerful arms wrapped around Marcus's torso, attempting to crush the air from his lungs while the captain recovered from the knee strike. Marcus had trained extensively in grappling, but not against opponents with Kozlov's size and strength advantages. Every technique he attempted was overpowered or simply absorbed by the captain's superior physical conditioning. Worse, the clinch was allowing Kozlov to recover his breathing while preventing Marcus from capitalizing on his earlier success. Using a technique from his judo training, Marcus managed to break the clinch by dropping his weight and spinning away from Kozlov's grip. But the separation came at a cost. The captain's parting shot was a short hook that caught Marcus in the ribs, sending pain shooting through his entire left side. Both fighters circled each other warily, breathing hard and reassessing their strategies. Marcus could see that his knee strike had definitely affected Kozlov, but the captain's recovery ability was impressive. Meanwhile, the pain in his ribs was making it difficult to breathe deeply. Though nothing seemed to be broken, the fight had reached a critical juncture. Both men had taken damage, both were tiring, and both understood that the next successful combination would likely determine the outcome. Kozlov made his move first, launching a desperate assault designed to overwhelm Marcus through pure aggression. Punch after punch came at Marcus from different angles, each one carrying enough power to end the fight if it connected cleanly. Marcus gave ground steadily, his defense barely adequate to deal with the captain's offensive fury. A right hand grazed his forehead, opening a small cut that immediately began bleeding. Under the first blood rule, the fight should have ended immediately, but something unexpected happened. Prince Alessandro, who had been watching with cold calculation throughout the fight, raised his hand to stop the referee from declaring an end to the combat. "The cut is superficial," the prince announced. "Continue." Marcus realized with growing horror that the rules were being changed as the fight progressed. The prince wasn't interested in a fair contest. He wanted to see Marcus destroyed completely, regardless of what happened to his own captain in the process. The knowledge that he was trapped in a fight that wouldn't end until he was unconscious or permanently injured triggered something primal in Marcus's psychology. All the discipline and control his master had taught him began to give way to a more fundamental survival instinct. When Kozlov pressed his advantage, expecting Marcus to continue retreating, he found instead a fighter who had stopped caring about points or technical superiority. Marcus absorbed a hard right hand to his injured ribs without backing down, responding with a vicious combination that targeted every vulnerable point he could reach. The change in Marcus's fighting style caught Kozlov completely off guard. Where before he had faced a technical fighter who relied on movement and precision, he now confronted someone fighting with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. Marcus's knee strikes, elbow shots, and punches began landing with increasing frequency as he abandoned defensive positioning in favor of all-out assault. Some of Kozlov's return fire got through, but Marcus no longer seemed to feel the pain or be deterred by the damage he was taking. The captain, who had been dominating through superior conditioning and experience, suddenly found himself being overwhelmed by an opponent who refused to acknowledge the punishment he was absorbing. A perfectly timed elbow strike caught Kozlov on the bridge of his nose, causing blood to pour down his face. By the prince's own modified rules, this should have ended the fight, but no signal came from the royal observer. Marcus pressed his advantage with a combination that drove Kozlov back against the wall. The captain's legs were unsteady now, his previous confidence replaced by the growing realization that he might be fighting someone who literally could not be stopped by conventional means. The end came suddenly. Kozlov threw a desperate haymaker that Marcus ducked easily, leaving the captain completely exposed. Marcus's counter was a perfect spinning back kick that landed with all of his remaining strength just below Kozlov's sternum. The captain collapsed to his knees, unable to breathe, blood from his broken nose pooling on the mat beneath him. For several long moments, the only sound in the room was the harsh breathing of both fighters. Marcus stood over his fallen opponent, his body battered and bleeding but his spirit unbroken. When he looked at Prince Alessandro, there was no submission in his eyes, only the cold satisfaction of someone who had proven his point through the most fundamental means possible. The prince's face showed a mixture of emotions, anger at his captain's defeat, but also a grudging respect for the demonstration of will he had just witnessed. When he finally spoke, his voice carried none of its earlier arrogance. "It appears, Mr. Chen, that modern martial arts have some merit after all." Marcus wiped blood from his split lip and adjusted his torn uniform. "With respect, Your Highness, this was never about modern versus traditional. It was about what happens when you push someone too far and then try to prevent them from defending themselves fairly." The prince was quiet for a long moment before nodding slowly. "Perhaps you are correct. Captain Kozlov will recover, and you have certainly earned your freedom from any legal consequences. I believe our business here is concluded." As Marcus left the embassy for the final time, he understood that something fundamental had changed within him. The fight had stripped away his illusions about honor and fair play, revealing something harder and more resilient beneath. He had learned that sometimes the most important victories come not from perfect technique or superior strategy, but from the simple refusal to be broken by circumstances beyond your control. The black belt around his waist meant something different now. Not just technical skill, but the knowledge that when everything else fails, the human spirit can be stronger than any physical force arrayed against it. That lesson, painful as it had been to learn, would stay with him for the rest of his life.